The wind howled like a banshee across the Louisiana bayou that October morning, bending ancient cypress trees into impossible angles and whipping Spanish moss into a frenzy that looked like nature's own battle cry. Hurricane Dalila was still 12 hours from making landfall, but her outer bands were already testing everything in their path, with gusts reaching 70 miles per hour. Most sensible folks had evacuated days ago, leaving behind a ghost town of boarded windows and sandbagged doorways. But in a world where the impossible becomes necessary, sense takes a backseat to duty. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At Riverbend Shooting Range, tucked away in the forgotten corners of Terrebonne Parish, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The kind of shot that defies physics, challenges belief, and reminds us that human potential has no ceiling when desperation meets skill. This is the story of Sarah Chun, a woman whose quiet existence masked a gift so rare that when the moment arrived, she would thread a bullet through a space no bigger than a silver dollar, across a distance that would make seasoned marksmen weep, in conditions that would ground commercial aircraft. Sarah Chun had been invisible for exactly 7 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Not literally invisible, of course, but functionally so in the way that only certain people can achieve in plain sight. At 41 years old, she moved through Riverbend Shooting Range like a shadow with a mop bucket, arriving each morning before the sun painted the bayou gold and leaving each evening after the last fluorescent light clicked off in the pro shop. The members called her the cleaning lady when they bothered to acknowledge her existence at all, which wasn't often. The range itself sprawled across 200 acres of reclaimed swampland, featuring everything from basic pistol lanes to a 1,000-yard rifle course that attracted competitive shooters from 3 states. Wealthy oil executives came here to play with custom rifles that cost more than most people's cars. Retired military contractors gathered in small groups to share war stories and test equipment that looked like it belonged in science fiction movies. Young trophy wives took Instagram photos with pink-gripped firearms while their husbands conducted business deals over expensive whiskey in the climate-controlled lounge. Sarah cleaned around all of them, emptying trash cans filled with expensive ammunition boxes, mopping floors tracked with Louisiana mud, and wiping down shooting benches where men discussed million-dollar deals while punching holes in paper targets. She wore the same faded blue uniform every day, her straight black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that never varied in style or length. Her work boots were comfortable and quiet, allowing her to move through the facility without disturbing the serious business of recreational shooting that kept the lights on and the mortgage paid. The range owner, Bobby Thibodeau, was a large man with soft hands who had inherited the business from his father and ran it with the casual efficiency of someone who had never worried about money. He treated Sarah with the distant politeness reserved for reliable appliances, paying her weekly wage without complaint and rarely engaging in conversation beyond basic instructions about special cleaning requirements or schedule changes. To Bobby, Sarah was a necessary expense, like electricity or insurance, present when needed and invisible when not. The regular members had their own unspoken hierarchy, and Sarah existed somewhere below the bottom rung. There was Marcus Webb, a former Marine sniper who now worked private security and carried himself like he was still expecting incoming fire. He practiced precision shooting 3 times a week with rifles that looked like they could stop vehicles, rarely acknowledging Sarah's presence except to grunt a minimal greeting when she cleaned around his shooting station. Marcus had the kind of focused intensity that made other shooters give him extra space on the firing line, and his targets consistently showed groupings that made grown men shake their heads in admiration. Then there was Jennifer Hartwell, the kind of woman who turned heads even in camouflage gear. She drove a pristine white Range Rover and shot expensive, European hunting rifles with the casual competence of someone who had learned from private instructors on family estates. Jennifer treated Sarah with the polite dismissiveness that wealthy women reserve for service staff, occasionally offering a bright smile that never quite reached her eyes while discussing hunting trips to Africa and ammunition preferences with other members who moved in her social circles. Dr. Michael Patterson represented the intellectual end of the shooting spectrum, a retired NASA engineer who approached marksmanship like a physics problem to be solved through careful calculation and precise equipment adjustment. He brought laptops to the range and recorded detailed data about every shot, analyzing wind patterns and atmospheric conditions with the thoroughness of someone launching satellites. Dr. Patterson sometimes nodded at Sarah when she cleaned his shooting station, the kind of absent acknowledgement a professor might give to a janitor in a university hallway. The younger members included Tommy Rodriguez, a police detective who practiced tactical shooting scenarios with the grim determination of someone who knew his life might depend on split-second accuracy. Tommy was friendly enough but treated Sarah like part of the facility's furniture, present but not particularly noteworthy. He often brought other law enforcement officers to the range, and they would huddle together discussing cases and techniques while Sarah worked quietly around their conversations, as invisible as the security cameras that recorded everything. Sarah's daily routine never varied. She arrived each morning at 5:30, unlocking the facility with her own set of keys and beginning the methodical process of preparing the range for another day of controlled explosions and precision engineering. She cleaned the overnight accumulation of dust from shooting benches, emptied trash receptacles filled with the detritus of expensive hobbies, and restocked supplies in the pro shop where members purchased ammunition that cost more per round than many people spent on lunch. The shooting lanes required special attention, particularly the concrete surfaces that accumulated lead residue and powder burns from hundreds of daily shots. Sarah used specialized cleaning solutions that could handle the unique contamination that came with indoor shooting facilities, working with the careful thoroughness of someone who understood that half measures could create safety hazards. She maintained the ventilation systems that kept the air breathable, replaced fluorescent bulbs that illuminated target areas, and ensured that every surface met the exacting standards expected by members who paid premium fees for premium facilities. Beyond the basic cleaning duties, Sarah had gradually taken on maintenance tasks that technically fell outside her job description, but that she performed without complaint or additional compensation. She calibrated the target retrieval systems that brought paper targets back and forth along steel cables, lubricated the mechanical components that raised and lowered target stands, and even performed minor repairs on equipment that would otherwise require expensive service calls from specialized technicians. The outdoor ranges presented their own challenges, particularly during Louisiana's humid summers, when heat and moisture created conditions that tested both equipment and human endurance. Sarah maintained the concrete shooting platforms that provided stable surfaces for precision work, cleared vegetation that threatened to obstruct sight lines, and ensured that the steel target systems remained properly anchored and aligned despite weather conditions that would warp lesser materials. During her lunch breaks, Sarah would often sit alone in her dented Honda Civic, eating sandwiches she prepared at home while watching members practice their various disciplines through the facility's large windows. She observed their techniques with the quiet attention of someone who understood more than she revealed, noting the subtle differences between recreational shooters and the few individuals who possessed genuine expertise. Her brown eyes would track the fluid movements of experienced marksmen, cataloging details that escaped the notice of casual observers. The members occasionally discussed their backgrounds and achievements while Sarah cleaned around them, unaware that their invisible custodian absorbed every word with the focused attention of a scholar studying ancient texts. She learned that Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, that Jennifer's father had been a competitive shooter who represented the United States in international competitions, and that Dr. Patterson had applied NASA's engineering principles to develop custom ammunition that achieved unprecedented accuracy in controlled conditions. Sarah never contributed to these conversations, never offered opinions about equipment choices or technique improvements, never revealed any knowledge that might suggest she was more than a simple cleaning woman who happened to work at a shooting facility. She existed in the spaces between conversations, present but unnoticed, functional but invisible, exactly as she had planned when she first applied for the position 7 years earlier. Her personnel file, kept in Bobby's locked filing cabinet, contained only the most basic information. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Social Security number, emergency contact information, and a sparse employment history that showed previous custodial work at various facilities around New Orleans. No military service, no shooting experience, no credentials that would suggest any familiarity with firearms beyond what she might have gained through proximity during her cleaning duties. The background check had revealed nothing unusual, no red flags that might have prompted deeper investigation into her past or qualifications. What the file didn't contain, what Bobby had never thought to investigate, was any information about Sarah's life before she arrived in Louisiana, seeking quiet employment at an isolated shooting facility. It didn't mention the small apartment she rented under her legal name in a modest neighborhood where she lived without luxury or ostentation. It didn't describe the careful routine she maintained outside of work, the deliberate isolation she had constructed around herself like armor against unwanted attention or uncomfortable questions. The members who passed through Riverbend Shooting Range each day never wondered about Sarah's story, never questioned why a woman with her obvious attention to detail and mechanical aptitude was content to work as a custodian at a shooting facility. They saw what they expected to see, a quiet, reliable employee who kept their recreational space clean and functional without requiring management or supervision. In their world, service staff existed to facilitate their hobbies and interests, not to possess independent histories or hidden depths. Sarah had cultivated this invisibility with the same precision that others applied to their marksmanship. Every aspect of her appearance and behavior had been carefully calibrated to avoid attracting notice or inspiring curiosity. Her clothing was practical but unremarkable, her demeanor professional but forgettable, her work performance competent but not so exceptional as to invite questions about her background or qualifications. She spoke with a slight Louisiana accent that suggested local roots, though anyone with a trained ear might have detected subtle inconsistencies that hinted at a more complex linguistic history. Her knowledge of local customs and geography was thorough but felt studied rather than instinctive, like someone who had researched her role carefully before assuming it. But these subtleties were lost on people who had no reason to examine their custodial staff with the attention they reserved for their equipment and targets. The shooting range's daily rhythm had become as familiar to Sarah as her own heartbeat. She knew which members preferred which lanes, which equipment required special handling, and which personalities needed extra space to pursue their precision obsessions without interference. She understood the unspoken protocols that governed behavior at serious shooting facilities, the quiet respect for concentration, and the careful attention to safety that separated professional environments from casual gun ranges. Marcus Webb typically arrived at 7:30 each Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, carrying a hard case containing a custom rifle that he assembled with ritualistic precision. He would spend exactly 90 minutes working through a training routine that never varied, firing deliberate shots at targets positioned at progressively longer distances. His movements were economical and purposeful, and Sarah had learned to clean around his practice sessions without disturbing the focused Concentration that transformed him from a pleasant enough security contractor into something approaching a human weapon. Jennifer Hartwell preferred Wednesday afternoons, when the range was typically less crowded and she could practice without feeling observed or judged by the male members, who sometimes offered unsolicited advice about equipment or technique. She shot European hunting rifles with scopes that cost more than most cars, working through exercises designed to prepare her for exotic hunting expeditions that she documented extensively on social media platforms that Sarah never accessed but heard discussed by other members. Dr. Patterson treated his range time like laboratory work, arriving with detailed notes about atmospheric conditions and equipment specifications. He would spend more time setting up his equipment than actually shooting, measuring distances with laser rangefinders and adjusting rifle scopes with the methodical precision of someone solving complex engineering problems. His targets always showed the kind of groupings that made other members stop their own practice to observe and admire, though he seemed more interested in the mathematical precision than any practical application. Tommy Rodriguez used the range for tactical training scenarios that reflected the reality of police work in a city where violence was often sudden and close range. He practiced quick-draw techniques and multiple target engagements, working through stress scenarios designed to prepare him for situations where hesitation meant death. His practice sessions had an urgency that distinguished them from the recreational shooting that characterized most member activities, and Sarah had learned to recognize the signs when Tommy was working through the aftermath of particularly difficult cases. The range's equipment represented millions of dollars in precision engineering, from custom rifles built by artisans who treated each weapon like a sculpture to electronic target systems that could measure shot placement to within fractions of an inch. Sarah maintained all of it with the careful attention of someone who understood that wealthy recreational shooters expected perfection in every detail of their expensive hobby. The ammunition storage area required special security protocols and climate control systems that protected expensive cartridges from humidity and temperature fluctuations that could affect their performance. Sarah maintained the inventory tracking systems that ensured proper rotation of stock and monitored the environmental controls that kept everything within optimal parameters. She understood which ammunition was suitable for which firearms and which combinations produced the best accuracy in different conditions, though she never offered this knowledge to members who spent considerable time and money learning the same information through trial and error. The outdoor ranges presented unique maintenance challenges, particularly the long-distance courses where members tested their skills at ranges that stretched beyond 1,000 yards. These facilities required constant attention to sightline clearance, target system maintenance, and surface preparation that would provide stable shooting platforms for precision work. Sarah maintained the concrete shooting benches that had been engineered to eliminate vibration and movement, the steel target systems that could withstand repeated impacts from high-powered rifles, and the communications equipment that allowed shooters to coordinate their activities safely across the extended distances. Weather was a constant factor in outdoor shooting, and Sarah had developed an intimate understanding of how Louisiana's climate affected everything from equipment performance to safety protocols. She knew which wind conditions made long-distance shooting dangerous, which humidity levels caused problems with optics, and which temperature variations required adjustments to ammunition storage and handling procedures. The range's safety protocols were extensive and strictly enforced, reflecting Bobby Thibodeau's awareness that any serious accident could destroy his business and potentially result in criminal liability. Sarah maintained the safety equipment and signage that reminded members of proper procedures, though she had observed that the most experienced shooters had internalized these protocols to the point where they were unconscious habits rather than conscious decisions. Range safety officers monitored member activities during busy periods, but Sarah had noticed that certain members commanded respect that transcended official authority. Marcus Webb's military background meant that other shooters deferred to his judgment about safety issues, while Dr. Patterson's analytical approach to shooting had earned him recognition as someone who understood the physics of ballistics well, enough to predict potential problems before they occurred. The social dynamics of the shooting community fascinated Sarah in ways she couldn't openly acknowledge. She observed how members formed informal hierarchies based on skill, experience, and equipment quality, how conversations about technique and equipment served as vehicles for establishing status and credibility, and how the shared passion for precision shooting created bonds that transcended normal social boundaries. Wealthy business executives found common ground with working class police officers when discussing the merits of different rifle calibers or scope manufacturers. Military veterans shared techniques with civilian competitors who would never experience combat, but who pursued accuracy with the same dedication that had once been applied to life and death situations. The shooting range served as a kind of neutral territory where normal social distinctions mattered less than demonstrated competence with precision instruments. Sarah cleaned around these interactions, invisible to participants, but absorbing every detail about techniques, equipment, and the subtle indicators that separated genuine expertise from casual enthusiasm. She learned to recognize the difference between recreational shooters who pursued accuracy as a hobby and the rare individuals whose relationship with firearms transcended sport or entertainment. Marcus Webb moved with the fluid economy that characterized someone who had used weapons in situations where mistakes meant death. His equipment choices reflected practical experience rather than theoretical preferences, and his shooting style demonstrated muscle memory that had been developed under pressure that recreational shooters would never experience. When Marcus shot, other members unconsciously stopped their own activities to observe, recognizing mastery even when they couldn't articulate what distinguished his performance from their own efforts. Jennifer Hartwell's shooting reflected different training but equal competence, the product of private instruction and expensive equipment, combined with natural talent that couldn't be purchased or manufactured. Her technique was textbook perfect, each movement precise and deliberate, producing results that would have impressed Olympic coaches. But her approach to shooting lacked the hard edge that characterized Marcus's military-trained efficiency, suggesting that her skills had been developed in controlled environments rather than tested under pressure. Dr. Patterson represented the intellectual approach to marksmanship, applying scientific methodology to achieve results that relied more on understanding than instinct. His equipment was calibrated with laboratory precision, his shooting positions calculated to optimize stability and repeatability, and his targets analyzed with the thoroughness of someone conducting research rather than pursuing recreation. His approach produced exceptional accuracy, but lacked the fluid adaptability that characterized truly exceptional marksmen. Sarah observed these distinctions while maintaining the appearance of someone whose interest in firearms extended only to keeping the facility clean and functional. She emptied trash cans without examining the expensive ammunition, boxes that revealed members' preferences and spending habits. She cleaned shooting benches without studying the equipment configurations that indicated different shooting disciplines and skill levels. She maintained target systems without analyzing the shot patterns that demonstrated each member's capabilities and limitations. But her brown eyes missed nothing, cataloging details with the systematic attention of someone whose survival had once depended on reading environments and assessing capabilities with split-second accuracy. She noted which members flinched slightly before shots, which equipment combinations produced the best results under different conditions, and which techniques were effective for recreational shooting versus practical applications. The range's evening routine provided Sarah with her only moments of complete solitude, when she could move through the facility without the need to maintain her carefully constructed invisibility. During these quiet hours, she would sometimes pause at shooting stations and observe the targets that members had left behind, studying shot patterns with the analytical attention that she couldn't display during business hours. Some targets showed the tight groupings that indicated genuine skill and quality equipment, while others revealed the inconsistency that characterized recreational shooters who enjoyed the activity without pursuing true proficiency. Occasionally, she would find targets that demonstrated exceptional accuracy, grouping so tight that they suggested capabilities beyond normal recreational standards. Marcus Webb's targets consistently showed precision that would have impressed military instructors, with shot groups that could be covered by a quarter at distances that challenged most recreational shooters. Jennifer Hartwell's targets reflected steady improvement over her years of membership, progressing from good recreational accuracy to groupings that suggested she could compete at national levels if she chose to pursue formal competition. Dr. Patterson's targets demonstrated the consistency that came from applying scientific methodology to shooting sports, with groupings that showed minimal variation despite changing atmospheric conditions that would affect lesser marksmen. His detailed notes and measurements left behind on shooting benches revealed an approach to accuracy that treated each shot as part of a larger experiment in applied physics. Sarah would study these abandoned targets and notes during her evening cleaning routine, analyzing the technical information with an understanding that would have surprised the members who created them. She understood the ballistic calculations that Dr. Patterson used to compensate for wind and atmospheric pressure. She recognized the shooting positions and breathing techniques that produced Marcus's military-grade accuracy. She could predict which equipment modifications would improve Jennifer's already impressive performance. But this knowledge remained hidden, locked away behind the facade of a simple custodian who happened to work in a shooting facility. Sarah had constructed her invisible existence with the same precision that others applied to their marksmanship, creating a perfect camouflage that allowed her to observe and learn without revealing the depths of her own understanding. The hurricane season of Sarah's 7th year at Riverbend Shooting Range had been particularly active, with multiple storms tracking through the Gulf of Mexico and testing the facility's preparation procedures. Bobby Thibodeau took storm preparation seriously, understanding that his expensive facility needed protection from wind and flooding that could destroy equipment worth millions of dollars. Sarah had become integral to these preparation procedures, though her contributions were typically attributed to other staff members or contractors who received credit for work she had actually performed. She understood which equipment needed special protection, which areas of the facility were most vulnerable to wind damage, and which preparation procedures were most effective for preserving the functionality of precision shooting equipment during extreme weather events. Hurricane Delilah had been tracking through the Gulf for almost a week, growing from a tropical storm into a major hurricane that threatened the entire Louisiana coast. Weather services had issued evacuation orders for coastal parishes, and most sensible residents had already moved inland to wait out the storm in safer locations. Bobby Thibodeau had closed the facility and evacuated with his family to relatives in Mississippi, leaving Sarah to complete the final preparation procedures that would protect the range during the hurricane's passage. She had secured outdoor equipment, protected indoor systems from potential flooding, and ensured that the facility would be ready to resume operations once the storm passed and damage assessments could be completed. But as Sarah completed her final preparation tasks that October morning, she had no way of knowing that Hurricane Delilah would bring more than wind and rain to Riverbend Shooting Range. Hidden in the chaos of the approaching storm was a situation that would strip away her carefully maintained invisibility and reveal capabilities that she had spent 7 years concealing from a world that had learned to see her as nothing more than a reliable custodian with a mop bucket and a quiet demeanor. The wind was already reaching dangerous levels as Sarah locked the facility and prepared to evacuate to her own safe location. Spanish moss whipped through the air like nature's confetti, and the ancient cypress trees that surrounded the range bent at angles that suggested they might not survive the storm's full fury. In the distance, she could hear the sound of emergency sirens and the rumble of heavy equipment as emergency responders positioned themselves to deal with the aftermath of what meteorologists were calling a potentially catastrophic weather event. Sarah Chun, the invisible custodian of Riverbend Shooting Range, drove away into the storm without knowing that within hours, she would be asked to attempt something that would challenge every assumption that 7 years of careful invisibility had created about who she was and what she was capable of accomplishing. When circumstances demanded the impossible from someone who had spent years ensuring that no one suspected she was capable of anything extraordinary at all. The emergency dispatch came through at 3:47 a.m., crackling over radio frequencies that cut through the howling wind like a desperate prayer. Hurricane Delilah had made an unexpected turn during the night, strengthening to a Category 4 monster that was now bearing down on Turaboni Parish with winds exceeding 150 miles per hour. But nature's fury wasn't the only crisis unfolding in the pre-dawn darkness. Deputy Sheriff Amanda Price pressed her radio closer to her ear, trying to catch every word through the static and interference that the storm created with electronic communications. She was hunkered down in the emergency command center that had been hastily established in the parish courthouse, one of the few buildings rated to withstand hurricane-force winds. Around her, emergency responders coordinated rescue operations for residents who had ignored evacuation orders and now found themselves trapped in rapidly deteriorating conditions. Unit 7 to command. We have a code red situation at the Boudreaux compound, came the strained voice of Sergeant Mike Castile, a 20-year veteran who rarely sounded rattled by anything. Armed subjects have taken hostages during the storm. They're using the hurricane as cover for some kind of operation. We can't get close enough to assess the full situation. Amanda felt her stomach clench as she processed this information. The Boudreaux compound was a sprawling estate owned by Claude Boudreaux, a prominent businessman whose legitimate operations in oil and shipping provided cover for activities that law enforcement had been investigating for years. The compound, set on 40 acres of high ground surrounded by swampland, accessible only by a single causeway that could be easily defended or destroyed to prevent approach. Command to Unit 7. What's your current position and status? Amanda responded, coordinating the response from her position at the communication desk. We're approximately half a mile from the compound perimeter, Sergeant Castile reported. The subjects have established defensive positions and are armed with high-powered rifles. They've got clear sight lines across the approach route. We counted at least 12 hostages through binoculars before they moved everyone inside the main house. The situation was rapidly becoming a nightmare scenario that combined the worst elements of natural disaster response with tactical law enforcement challenges. Hurricane Delilah's winds made helicopter operations impossible, and the storm surge had already flooded the normal access routes that would allow tactical teams to approach the compound under cover. Sheriff Tom Babineau, a heavy-set man in his late 50s who had spent 3 decades in Louisiana law enforcement, studied satellite imagery of the Boudreaux compound on a computer screen that flickered with each power surge from the emergency generators. The compound's main house was a modern fortress disguised as a luxury mansion, with reinforced construction and strategic positioning that made it nearly impregnable under normal circumstances. During a hurricane with limited visibility and no air support, it might as well have been on another planet. How many subjects are we looking at? Sheriff Babineau asked into his radio. Best estimate is 8 to 10 armed individuals, Sergeant Castile responded. They appear to be well organized and equipped with military-grade weapons. This isn't some opportunistic crime taking advantage of the storm. These people planned this operation specifically around the hurricane timing. Amanda studied the tactical display that showed the compound's layout and defensive advantages. The main house sat on a slight elevation that provided commanding views of the surrounding area. A single access road crossed open ground for nearly 1,000 yards. Before reaching the house, creating a kill zone that no tactical team could cross under fire. The surrounding swampland was impassable during normal conditions and completely flooded during the current storm surge. Sir, we need to consider that this might be connected to the federal investigation into Boudreaux's business operations. Amanda suggested quietly. FBI has been building a case around money laundering and arms trafficking. The timing of this operation during a major hurricane suggests they might be trying to destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses before federal agents can execute search warrants. Sheriff Babineau nodded grimly. He had been briefed on the federal investigation and knew that Claude Boudreaux was suspected of using his legitimate businesses to facilitate weapons trafficking for international criminal organizations. The hostage situation might be the culmination of a power struggle within criminal networks that used the hurricane as cover for settling accounts. What about federal tactical support? The sheriff asked. FBI tactical teams are grounded by the hurricane, Amanda reported after checking with federal coordinators. Same with state police special operations. Nothing with rotors can fly in these wind conditions, and ground units can't reach us until the storm passes. We're on our own for at least 12 hours. The radio crackled again with an update from the field. Command, this is Unit 7. The subjects just executed one of the hostages in clear view of our position. They're sending a message that they're serious about defending their position. We need immediate tactical response. Sheriff Babineau felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 12 innocent people were trapped with armed killers who had just demonstrated their willingness to murder hostages. Standard tactical protocols required specialized teams with advanced equipment and extensive planning. But Hurricane Delilah had eliminated every standard option, leaving only desperate improvisation and slim chances of success. Distance from your position to the main house? The sheriff asked. Approximately 1,500 yards across open ground, Sergeant Castile responded. No cover, perfect visibility for defenders, and they've got the high ground advantage. It's a textbook killing field. Amanda pulled up detailed maps of the area, searching for any tactical advantage that might allow law enforcement to approach the compound without crossing the deadly open space. Satellite imagery showed the compound's defensive strengths and the limited options available to attacking forces. The main house had been designed with security in mind, featuring reinforced walls, bulletproof windows, and strategic positioning that maximized the defender's advantages. What about sniper support? Amanda asked. If we can't get close enough for a tactical assault, maybe we can provide precision fire to neutralize specific threats. Negative, came the response from the field. Wind conditions are gusting over 70 miles per hour with heavy rain. No shot would be reliable at this distance in these conditions. We'd need a miracle shooter to make any kind of accurate fire. Sheriff Babineau stared at the tactical display, feeling the weight of impossible decisions. Every minute they delayed meant more potential hostage executions, but rushing into an assault under these conditions would result in massive casualties among his officers and probably wouldn't save any hostages. They needed capabilities that didn't exist, equipment they didn't have, and conditions that nature had specifically designed to prevent. Sir, we're receiving reports that the subjects are preparing for another execution, Amanda announced after monitoring radio traffic from surveillance units. They appear to be on some kind of timeline. Whatever they're trying to accomplish, they're accelerating their schedule. The sheriff made the hardest decision of his career. All units establish a perimeter and maintain surveillance. Do not approach within effective rifle range. We'll coordinate a tactical response as soon as weather conditions permit helicopter support. But as he gave these orders, Sheriff Babineau knew that waiting for conditions to improve meant writing death sentences for the remaining hostages. The armed subjects had demonstrated their willingness to kill, and every hour of delay gave them more time to eliminate witnesses and complete whatever operation they had planned. Law enforcement was trapped by circumstances beyond their control, watching helplessly as a crisis unfolded that demanded capabilities no one possessed. At 4:23 a.m., the situation took another turn toward the impossible. Sergeant Castill's voice came over the radio with barely controlled urgency. "Command, the subjects have just made contact via radio. They're demanding safe passage out of the area in exchange for hostage release. They've given us 30 minutes to provide helicopter evacuation, or they start executing hostages every 15 minutes. Copy that, Unit 7, Sheriff Babineau responded, though he knew the demand was impossible to fulfill. Continue surveillance and report any changes in subject behavior or positions. Amanda coordinated with aviation units throughout the region, but the response was universally negative. Hurricane Delilah's winds made any flight operations suicidal, and no pilot was willing to attempt landing at the compound, even if they could somehow reach the area. The demands were designed to be impossible, ensuring that the hostage executions would continue on schedule, regardless of law enforcement response. Sheriff, we're getting intelligence that suggests this operation is connected to a larger criminal network, Amanda reported after speaking with federal coordinators. The Boudreaux compound was apparently being used as a staging area for weapons shipments to international buyers. The subjects might be eliminating witnesses to prevent testimony in federal prosecutions. The pieces of a complex criminal conspiracy were falling into place, but understanding the motivation behind the hostage crisis didn't provide any tactical solutions to the immediate problem. 12 innocent people were trapped with killers who had already demonstrated their willingness to murder anyone who might threaten their escape plans. At 4:45 a.m., nature provided one small break in the storm of bad news. The hurricane's eye wall passed slightly to the east of their position, creating a temporary reduction in wind speeds that might allow for limited operations. But even with winds dropping to 50 miles per hour, the conditions remained far beyond the safety parameters for precision shooting or tactical assaults. Unit 7 to command, subjects have moved to execute another hostage, came the desperate report from the field. They're positioned at the main house entrance, approximately 1,500 yards from our location. We can see everything through scopes, but there's no way to intervene at this distance in these conditions. Sheriff Babineau closed his eyes and tried to think of options that didn't exist. His tactical team was trained for close-quarters operations, not precision shooting across impossible distances in hurricane conditions. The state police sniper teams were grounded by weather, and federal support was hours away at minimum. They needed capabilities that were beyond human possibility, skills that existed only in military legends and Hollywood fantasies. "Sir, we have someone here who wants to speak with you," Amanda announced unexpectedly. "Says she might have information relevant to the tactical situation." Sheriff Babineau looked up to see Amanda approaching with a woman he didn't recognize. She was Asian, probably in her early 40s, wearing a simple rain jacket and jeans that suggested she had been caught by the emergency like everyone else. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved with the quiet composure of someone accustomed to crisis situations. "Sheriff Babineau, I'm Sarah Chun," she said with a slight Louisiana accent that didn't quite ring true to his practiced ear. "I work at Riverbend Shooting Range. I heard your officers discussing the tactical situation, and I might be able to help." The sheriff studied her with the practiced assessment of someone who had spent decades evaluating whether civilians could contribute meaningfully to law enforcement operations. Sarah Chun looked like exactly what she claimed to be, a shooting range employee who happened to be in the emergency center during the hurricane. Nothing about her appearance or demeanor suggested any relevant expertise for a hostage crisis that required capabilities beyond normal human limits. "Ma'am, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this is a specialized tactical situation," Sheriff Babineau explained politely. "We're dealing with armed subjects at extreme range and conditions that would challenge the most experienced marksmen." "I understand the difficulty, Sheriff," Sarah responded calmly. "But I've been listening to your tactical discussions, and I might have access to equipment and capabilities that could be relevant to your situation." Amanda looked skeptical. "Ma'am, this isn't a civilian shooting competition. We're talking about precision shots at 1,500 yards in hurricane conditions against targets that will shoot back. This requires military-grade equipment and training that civilians don't typically possess." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the deputy's concerns. "The Riverbend facility has equipment that might be suitable for extreme-range precision work. Custom rifles with advanced optics, specialized ammunition designed for long-distance accuracy, and shooting platforms engineered for stability under adverse conditions." Sheriff Babineau felt a flicker of interest despite his skepticism. "You're talking about taking equipment from a civilian shooting range and attempting precision shots that professional snipers won't attempt in these conditions?" "I'm talking about using the best available equipment under impossible circumstances, because the alternative is watching innocent people die," Sarah replied with quiet intensity. "The range has rifles and optics worth more than most police departments' annual budgets. Equipment designed for precision work at extreme distances." The sheriff exchanged glances with Amanda, both of them thinking the same thing. They were facing a situation that demanded impossible capabilities, and impossible situations sometimes required desperate measures. Even if Sarah Chun's suggestion was a long shot beyond reason, it might be the only shot they had. "Assuming we could access this equipment, who would attempt the shots?" Amanda asked. "Our officers are trained for tactical operations, not precision marksmanship at these distances. The range has members with extensive shooting experience," Sarah replied. "Former military personnel, competitive shooters, people with the training and experience necessary for challenging shots." But even as she made this suggestion, Sarah knew that the shooting range members were evacuated or unreachable due to the hurricane. Marcus Webb was visiting family in Texas, Jennifer Hartwell had flown to Europe for a hunting expedition, and Dr. Patterson was attending a conference in Colorado. The very people whose skills might be relevant to the current crisis were scattered across the country, as unreachable as federal tactical teams. Sheriff Babineau made a decision that reflected both desperation and leadership responsibility. "Show me this equipment. If there's any possibility that civilian resources could help save those hostages, we need to evaluate every option." Sarah led the sheriff and Amanda through the emergency center to a side office, where she could brief them on the technical capabilities available at Riverbend Shooting Range. She described custom rifles chambered in specialized calibers designed for extreme range accuracy, advanced optics that could compensate for atmospheric conditions, and ammunition engineered to maintain stability across distances that challenge the laws of physics. The facility has a custom rifle built by Barrett, specifically for extreme-range precision work, Sarah explained with technical knowledge that surprised both law enforcement officers. "It's chambered in 50 BMG with match-grade ammunition and topped with optics that cost more than most cars. In controlled conditions, it's capable of precision shots well beyond 1,500 yards. But these aren't controlled conditions," Amanda pointed out. "We're talking about hurricane winds, heavy rain, and targets that will be actively trying to kill whoever attempts the shot. The range also has a concrete shooting platform designed to eliminate vibration and movement," Sarah continued. "It's positioned to provide clear sight lines across the distance to the Boudreaux compound. The platform was engineered for precision work under adverse conditions." Sheriff Babineau studied satellite imagery that showed the shooting range's position relative to the compound. The geography was favorable, with the range's long-distance shooting platforms providing potential firing positions that could reach the compound across the intervening swampland. But favorable geography didn't address the fundamental problem of finding someone capable of making impossible shots under impossible conditions. Equipment is only as good as the person using it, the sheriff observed. Even with the best rifle and optics available, these shots would challenge the most experienced military snipers. We need someone with extraordinary capabilities, not just access to expensive equipment. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Sheriff, I've worked at that range for 7 years. I've observed every member's capabilities, studied their techniques, and maintained their equipment. I understand what's possible with the right combination of skill, equipment, and determination. Understanding and executing are different things, Amanda said gently. Watching skilled shooters doesn't translate to having those skills yourself. We're talking about shots that would be difficult for Olympic-level marksmen under perfect conditions. But Sarah had already made her decision, the same way she had made the decision 7 years earlier to disappear into invisible servitude at a shooting range. Sometimes circumstances demanded that hidden capabilities be revealed, regardless of the personal cost or the disruption to carefully constructed anonymity. Deputy Price, I appreciate your concern about civilian capabilities, Sarah said with quiet authority that neither law enforcement officer had heard from her before. But right now, you have 12 hostages facing execution by armed criminals, weather conditions that prevent any conventional tactical response, and a timeline that's measured in minutes rather than hours. Sheriff Babineau noticed the subtle change in Sarah's demeanor. The way her posture had shifted from civilian deference to something approaching command presence. Her voice carried undertones of authority that suggested familiarity with crisis, decision-making, and her analysis of the tactical situation demonstrated understanding that went beyond casual observation. Ma'am, are you saying you have personal shooting experience that would be relevant to this situation? The sheriff asked directly. Sarah considered her response carefully, weighing 7 years of careful invisibility against the lives of 12 innocent hostages. Sheriff, I'm saying that I have access to equipment and capabilities that represent your only option for intervening in this crisis before more people die. The radio crackled with another update from the field. Command. Subjects have executed a second hostage. They're maintaining their timeline for additional executions. We need immediate response options. Sheriff Babineau felt the weight of command crushing down on him like hurricane winds. Every conventional option had been eliminated by circumstances beyond his control. Federal tactical teams were grounded, state police snipers were unreachable, and local resources were inadequate for the specialized demands of the situation. He was faced with choosing between watching helplessly as hostages were executed or authorizing a desperate gamble that defied all tactical common sense. Miss Chun, I want to be absolutely clear about what you're proposing, the sheriff said. With grim formality, you're suggesting that we access civilian shooting equipment and attempt precision shots at 1,500 yards in hurricane conditions against armed subjects who will return fire with military-grade weapons. I'm suggesting that we use the best available resources to save innocent lives when conventional options have been eliminated by circumstances, Sarah replied. Sometimes extraordinary situations require extraordinary responses. Amanda studied Sarah with growing curiosity about the quiet confidence that had replaced her earlier civilian deference. Ma'am, this conversation suggests you have shooting experience beyond what you initially indicated. If you're proposing to attempt these shots yourself, we need to understand your actual qualifications. Sarah met Amanda's gaze without flinching. Deputy, my qualifications are that I have access to equipment capable of making the necessary shots and the willingness to attempt them when no one else can. Under current circumstances, those might be the only qualifications that matter. Sheriff. Babineau made his decision with the grim awareness that he was authorizing an operation that violated every tactical protocol he had learned during 30 years in law enforcement. "Ms. Chun, if you're willing to attempt this operation, we'll provide whatever support we can. But I want you to understand that we're talking about shots that professional snipers wouldn't attempt under these conditions. I understand the difficulties." "Sheriff," Sarah replied with calm determination, "but I also understand that 12 innocent people will die if someone doesn't try." The drive to Riverbend shooting range took 20 minutes through conditions that tested the limits of vehicle safety. Hurricane Delilah's outer bands were still producing winds that rocked the police cruiser and rain that reduced visibility to almost zero. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, studying satellite imagery of the compound and calculating the technical requirements for shots that defied reasonable possibility. The compound's main house was positioned on elevated ground that provided clear sight lines but also exposed potential shooters to return fire from multiple defensive positions. The distance of 1,500 yards was at the extreme end of what was possible, even with the best equipment, and atmospheric conditions would affect bullet trajectory in ways that required instant calculations and split-second adjustments. "Ms. Chun, I have to ask directly," Amanda said as she navigated through debris-strewn roads. "Do you have military or law enforcement training that would prepare you for this kind of operation?" Sarah watched the hurricane-ravaged landscape passing outside the cruiser windows. "Deputy, I have experience that's relevant to the current situation. Whether that experience came from military service, law enforcement training, or other sources is less important than whether it can help save those hostages." It was an answer that revealed nothing while suggesting everything. The kind of carefully constructed response that Amanda recognized from dealing with people who had sensitive backgrounds they preferred not to discuss. Sarah Chun was clearly more than a simple shooting range custodian, but her exact qualifications remained hidden behind layers of careful ambiguity. Riverbend shooting range looked like a war zone when they arrived, with building debris scattered across the parking area and several trees down across the access roads. But the main structures had survived the hurricane's assault, and the specialized shooting platforms appeared to be intact despite the battering they had received from wind and rain. Sarah led them directly to the facility's equipment storage area, where custom rifles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were secured in climate-controlled cases. She selected a Barrett M107 A1 chambered in 50 BMG, a rifle designed for extreme-range precision work that weighed nearly 30 pounds and required specialized mounting systems to manage its enormous recoil. This rifle is capable of precision shots well beyond 1,500 yards under ideal conditions, Sarah explained as she assembled the weapon with the fluid efficiency of someone intimately familiar with its operation. The optic system can compensate for atmospheric conditions and provide accurate range calculations for extreme distance shots. Amanda watched Sarah's practiced movements with growing amazement. The rifle assembly required knowledge of complex mechanical systems and specialized procedures that suggested extensive training with precision weapons. Sarah's handling of the equipment demonstrated familiarity that went far beyond casual observation of range members. "Ma'am, you're assembling that rifle like you've done it hundreds of times," Amanda observed. That level of familiarity suggests significant experience with precision shooting equipment. Sarah mounted the rifle's advanced optic system, a Schmidt and Bender scope worth more than most cars that incorporated laser range-finding, atmospheric sensors, and ballistic computers capable of calculating trajectory adjustments for extreme range shots. "Deputy, I've maintained this equipment for 7 years. That maintenance requires understanding how each component functions and how they work together as a system." But maintenance knowledge didn't explain the unconscious muscle memory that guided Sarah's movements or the instinctive familiarity she demonstrated with equipment that required specialized training to operate effectively. Amanda began to suspect that Sarah Chun's background included experiences that she was deliberately concealing for reasons that might become relevant to the current operation. Sheriff Babineau arrived at the range in a second police cruiser, accompanied by technical specialists who would coordinate communications with the tactical teams maintaining surveillance on the compound. The operation had grown beyond a simple shooting exercise into a complex coordination effort that required precise timing and extensive technical support. Ms. Chun, our surveillance teams report that the subjects are maintaining defensive positions inside the main house, the sheriff briefed as Sarah completed her equipment preparation. They have clear sight lines to potential shooting positions and will return fire immediately once they identify the source of incoming shots. Sarah studied detailed maps of the compound that showed the tactical challenges she would face. The main house was designed with security in mind, featuring reinforced construction and strategic positioning that minimized exposure to external threats. The hostages were being held in interior rooms that provided additional protection from potential rescue attempts. Sheriff, the technical requirements for these shots go beyond simple marksmanship, Sarah explained with authority that surprised the law enforcement officers. Wind compensation at 1,500 yards requires real-time atmospheric analysis and instant trajectory calculations. A single degree of error at the shooting position translates to several feet of miss at the target. Can the optic system handle those calculations? Amanda asked. The scope can provide atmospheric data and range information, but the shooter has to interpret that data and make adjustments based on actual conditions, Sarah replied. No computer can substitute for experience and judgment when dealing with variables that change from second to second. Sarah moved to the range's precision shooting platform, a concrete structure engineered to eliminate vibration and provide stable support for extreme range shots. The platform was positioned to provide clear sight lines across the swampland to the compound, though the intervening distance was complicated by atmospheric conditions that would challenge even the most advanced ballistic calculations. Range to target is 1,547 yards, according to laser measurement, Sarah announced after using the scope's range-finding system. Wind is variable between 15 and 35 miles per hour, with gusts exceeding 50. Atmospheric pressure is dropping due to the hurricane, which will affect bullet trajectory. Sheriff Babineau listened to these technical details with growing appreciation for the complexity of what Sarah was attempting. Ms. Chun, these conditions would challenge the most experienced military snipers. Are you confident that these shots are even possible? Sarah adjusted the rifle's position on the shooting platform and began entering atmospheric data into the scope's ballistic computer. Sheriff, confidence isn't relevant when people are dying and no one else can help. Possibility is determined by physics, preparation, and execution. Everything else is just opinion. The radio crackled with an update from the surveillance teams. Command, subjects are preparing for another execution. They've moved a hostage to the main entrance and are maintaining their timeline. Estimated 3 minutes until execution. Sarah settled into shooting position behind the massive rifle, her body assuming the stable platform that precision shooting required. Through the scope, she could see the compound's main house magnified to the point where individual windows and architectural details were clearly visible despite the distance and atmospheric interference. Target acquired, she reported with calm professionalism. I can see subject movement inside the house and hostage positions near the main entrance. Atmospheric conditions are challenging but manageable. Amanda monitored radio communications while watching Sarah prepare for shots that defied reasonable possibility. Miss Chun, once you fire the first shot, they'll know your position and return fire immediately. These people are armed with military-grade weapons and will concentrate fire on this platform. Deputy, that's why the first shot has to count, Sarah replied without taking her eye from the scope. Precision shooting at this range allows for very little margin of error. Sheriff Babineau coordinated with tactical teams to ensure that Sarah's shots would be followed immediately by assault operations that could take advantage of any confusion or disruption she created among the armed subjects. The coordination required split-second timing and precise communication between multiple units, operating under extraordinary conditions. "All units, prepare for precision fire support," the sheriff announced over tactical radio channels. "Shooting will commence in approximately 60 seconds, followed immediately by coordinated tactical response." Sarah studied the target area through her scope, identifying specific threats and calculating the sequence of shots that would maximize the chances of hostage survival. The armed subjects had positioned themselves to provide overlapping fields of fire while maintaining cover from potential assault teams, but their defensive positions also created opportunities for precision shots from extreme range. "Wind is gusting between 25 and 40 miles per hour," Sarah reported as she monitored atmospheric conditions through her scope's sensors. "I'm compensating for wind drift and atmospheric pressure changes, but these conditions are at the absolute limit of what's possible for precision shooting." The radio provided another update from surveillance teams. "Command, subject is in position to execute hostage. We need immediate intervention." Sarah's breathing slowed to the deliberate rhythm that precision shooting required, her entire world narrowing to the view through her scope and the technical calculations that would determine whether her shot could travel 1,547 yards through hurricane winds to find its target with the precision necessary to save innocent lives. "Taking the shot," she announced with calm finality, her fingers settling on the trigger of a rifle that represented the absolute pinnacle of precision shooting technology, operated by someone whose true capabilities remained hidden behind 7 years of carefully constructed invisibility. The first shot echoed across the Louisiana swampland like thunder, cutting through Hurricane Delilah's howling winds with a sound that spoke of precision engineering and devastating power. The .50 caliber bullet left the Barrett's muzzle at 2,820 feet per second, beginning a journey through atmospheric chaos that would challenge every law of ballistics and physics. Sarah Chun watched through her scope as the massive projectile arced across 1,547 yards of hurricane-ravaged air, compensating for wind drift that would have sent a lesser marksman's shot into the swampland. The bullet found its target with surgical precision, punching through the reinforced window of the compound's main house and eliminating the armed subject who had been preparing to execute another hostage. "Target down," Sarah announced with mechanical calm, already cycling the bolt. Action and acquiring her next target. Subject 1 neutralized. Adjusting for wind changes. Sheriff Babineau watched in stunned amazement as Sarah's shot accomplished what every tactical expert had declared impossible. The distance, the atmospheric conditions, the target's defensive positioning, all of it should have made accurate fire impossible. Yet through his binoculars, he could see the chaos erupting inside the compound as the remaining subjects scrambled to respond to an attack they hadn't anticipated. "Jesus Christ," Amanda Price whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. She actually made that shot. But Sarah was already focused on her second target, tracking movement through the scope with the fluid precision of someone whose muscle memory had been forged in circumstances far more demanding than a shooting range. The armed subjects inside the compound were moving with the tactical efficiency of trained soldiers, seeking cover while trying to identify the source of the incoming fire. "Subject 2 move into defensive position at the north window," Sarah reported, her voice carrying the professional detachment of someone providing tactical intelligence. "Wind shift detected, compensating for new atmospheric conditions." The second shot followed 30 seconds later, punching through another reinforced window with the same devastating accuracy. The bullet traveled its impossible trajectory through hurricane winds that should have made precision shooting a fantasy, finding its target with the certainty of advanced physics combined with skills that transcended normal human limitations. Through the scope, Sarah could see the remaining subjects abandoning their prepared defensive positions and moving deeper into the house's interior. Their tactical movements suggested military training, but their positioning revealed panic at facing an enemy who could reach them from distances they had considered safe. Multiple subjects retreating to interior positions, Sarah reported while tracking movement through various windows. They're maintaining control of hostages but abandoning perimeter defense. Sheriff Babineau coordinated with tactical teams. As Sarah's precision fire created opportunities that hadn't existed moments earlier. All units, subjects are consolidating position in the main house interior. Prepare for coordinated assault on my command. But the operation was far from over. The remaining subjects had moved the hostages to interior rooms where precision fire from extreme range couldn't reach them. The compound's defensive advantages still favored the criminals, and they retained enough firepower to devastate any conventional assault team that attempted to approach across the open ground. "Sheriff, I need to move closer," Sarah announced. While studying the compound through her scope, "The remaining subjects are using interior positions that I can't engage from this range. They still have operational advantage." Amanda felt her stomach clench at the implications. "Ms. Chen, moving closer means exposing yourself to return fire from multiple subjects with military-grade weapons. They'll concentrate everything they have on your position. Deputy, those hostages are dead if someone doesn't neutralize the remaining threats," Sarah replied with calm finality. "Long-range precision has created tactical opportunities, but finishing this operation requires direct engagement." Sarah began disassembling the Barrett rifle with the same fluid efficiency she had shown during assembly, but now her movements carried additional urgency. She selected a lighter weapon from the range's inventory, a custom AR-15 platform-chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor that offered better mobility while maintaining precision capabilities at intermediate ranges. "MAAM, what you're suggesting isn't tactical support anymore," Sheriff Babineau observed with growing concern. "You're talking about direct assault operations against multiple armed subjects in defensive positions." "Sheriff, I'm talking about finishing what we started," Sarah replied while checking the lighter rifle's optics and ammunition. 2 subjects down, approximately 6 remaining, hostages still in immediate danger. The mathematics are simple. But as Sarah prepared for the next phase of her operation, radio communications from the compound revealed that the situation was becoming more complex. The armed subjects were communicating with outside contacts, suggesting that the hostage crisis was part of a larger operation that extended beyond the immediate location. "Command, we're intercepting radio traffic that indicates additional subjects approaching the compound," reported Sergeant Castile from his surveillance position. "Unknown number of reinforcements. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. "Sheriff." Babineau felt the tactical situation slipping beyond his control. Sarah's extraordinary marksmanship had disrupted the criminals' original plan, but they were adapting with the flexibility of experienced professionals. Additional subjects meant more firepower, more tactical options for the criminals, and exponentially greater danger for the remaining hostages. "Ms. Chen, this situation is escalating beyond what any individual can handle," the sheriff warned. "We need to coordinate with federal tactical teams and wait for additional support." "Sheriff, those hostages don't have 15 minutes, Sarah replied while slinging the lighter rifle across her shoulder. "Every minute we delay gives the subjects more time to organize, more opportunities to eliminate witnesses, and more tactical advantages." Amanda watched Sarah's preparations with growing amazement at the transformation she was witnessing. The quiet custodian who had cleaned around shooting range members for 7 years had revealed herself as someone with tactical capabilities that challenged belief. Her equipment handling, situational awareness, and operational planning suggested. Training that went far beyond civilian shooting sports. "Ma'am, your performance with that rifle suggests military or specialized law enforcement background," Amanda said directly. "If you have tactical training that's relevant to this operation, we need to understand your actual qualifications." Sarah secured additional ammunition and equipment while considering how much of her carefully guarded background she could reveal without compromising operational security that extended far beyond the current crisis. "Deputy, my qualifications are that I can do what needs to be done when no one else can. Under current circumstances, that's the only credential that matters." But Sarah's evasive response only reinforced Amanda's growing suspicions about her true identity. The fluid weapon handling, tactical language, and operational confidence suggested someone with extensive combat experience, who had deliberately concealed her background for reasons that might be connected to classified operations or sensitive assignments. "Command, subjects are moving hostages to the compound's basement level," came an update from surveillance teams. "They're consolidating defensive positions and preparing for extended standoff. They appear to be implementing a predetermined contingency plan." Sarah studied satellite imagery that showed the compound's layout and the tactical challenges presented by basement-level defensive positions. The criminals were demonstrating sophisticated planning that suggested professional military or intelligence backgrounds, and their operational security indicated preparation for exactly this type of law enforcement response. "Sheriff, those subjects aren't random criminals taking advantage of hurricane conditions," Sarah observed while analyzing their tactical movements. "Their positioning, communications discipline, and contingency planning suggest organized professional operation with extensive resources." Sheriff Babineau had reached the same conclusion based on the intelligence reports he was receiving from federal coordinators. "Ms. Chun, we're dealing with what appears to be an international criminal organization using the hurricane as cover for operations that extend far beyond simple hostage-taking." But understanding the scope of the criminal conspiracy didn't change the immediate tactical requirements. 12 innocent hostages remained trapped with armed killers, who had demonstrated their willingness to execute anyone who threatened their operational objectives. Professional criminals or not, they were still holding innocent lives hostage in a situation that demanded immediate intervention. Sarah moved toward the shooting range's exit, carrying equipment that represented her transition from precision marksman to direct action operator. "Sheriff, I'm moving to engage remaining subjects at close range. The hostage situation requires immediate resolution, regardless of the larger criminal conspiracy." "Miss Chun, what you're proposing is essentially a one-person assault on a fortified position defended by multiple armed subjects," Amanda protested. "Even with your demonstrated shooting skills, those odds are impossible." "Deputy, impossible odds are just mathematics until someone changes the variables," Sarah replied while checking her equipment one final time. "Those hostages are facing certain death if no one intervenes. Uncertain survival chances are better than no chances at all." Sheriff Babineau made the decision that would define his career and possibly determine whether 12 innocent people lived or died. "Ms. Chun, if you're determined to attempt this operation, we'll provide whatever support we can. But I want you to understand that we're authorizing actions that go far beyond normal civilian involvement in law enforcement operations." "Sheriff, normal circumstances don't require normal responses," Sarah replied with quiet intensity. "Sometimes extraordinary situations demand that people reveal capabilities they've spent years keeping hidden." The drive toward the compound took place through hurricane conditions that tested the limits of vehicle operation and human endurance. Sarah rode in the passenger seat of Amanda's police cruiser, studying tactical maps and coordinating with surveillance teams while mentally preparing for operations that would strip away the last vestiges of her carefully maintained anonymity. "Ms. Chun, once this operation is over, There are going to be questions about your background and qualifications, Amanda warned while navigating through debris-strewn roads. Your demonstrated capabilities suggest training and experience that civilian records don't support. Deputy, I'll answer whatever questions I can after those hostages are safe, Sarah replied while monitoring radio communications from the compound. Right now, the only thing that matters is completing the mission and saving innocent lives. But Sarah knew that successful completion of the current operation would inevitably lead to investigations that would uncover the carefully constructed identity she had maintained for 7 years. Federal agencies would examine her background. Military databases would be searched, and classified records might be accessed to determine how a shooting range custodian had acquired capabilities that rivaled elite special operations personnel. The compound's perimeter was a maze of defensive positions that had been prepared over years of gradual construction. Concrete barriers, reinforced walls, and strategic sightlines created overlapping fields of fire that could devastate conventional assault teams. But the same defensive features that protected against direct assault also created blind spots and tactical vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with the right training and equipment. Sarah studied the compound through binoculars while coordinating with tactical teams that would provide overwatch and support during her approach. The remaining subjects had consolidated their positions, but were still moving with the nervous energy of people whose operational plan had been disrupted by unexpected precision fire from impossible ranges. Target building has 6 confirmed subjects remaining, Sarah announced after studying movement patterns through various windows. They're maintaining defensive positions but showing signs of tactical confusion. The precision shots have disrupted their confidence and forced adaptation to circumstances they didn't anticipate. Sheriff Babineau monitored federal communications while Sarah prepared for her approach to the compound. Ms. Chun, federal tactical teams are reporting estimated arrival in 45 minutes. If you can maintain current tactical pressure without direct engagement, we might be able to wait for specialized support. Sheriff, those subjects just executed another hostage, came a report from surveillance teams. They're accelerating their timeline and demonstrating that delay means additional casualties. We need immediate intervention. Sarah made her final equipment checks while studying the approach route that would take her across open ground toward a fortified position, defended by multiple armed subjects. The tactical challenges were enormous, but the alternative was watching helplessly as more innocent people died while waiting for support that might arrive too late to matter. Deputy, I need you to coordinate precision fire support from the shooting platform, Sarah instructed while preparing to leave the relative safety of the police perimeter. Target any subjects who engage me during the approach, but be careful of crossfire situations once I reach the compound interior. Amanda felt the weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders like hurricane winds. Ma'am, I'm not qualified for precision shooting at these ranges. The equipment requires training and experience that I don't possess. Deputy, the rifle is already calibrated for current atmospheric conditions, Sarah explained while transferring operational knowledge with the efficiency of someone accustomed to training others under pressure. The scope will provide targeting information, but you'll need to compensate for wind changes and maintain steady position during recoil. But even as Sarah provided technical instruction, both women understood that Amanda's role would be primarily psychological rather than tactical. Her presence at the shooting platform would provide the appearance of sniper overwatch that might influence the subject's tactical decisions, even if her actual shooting capabilities were limited. Sarah began her approach to the compound through swampland that hurricane Delilah had transformed into a nightmare of fallen trees, standing water, and debris that could conceal her movement while also creating obstacles that slowed her progress. She moved with the fluid efficiency of someone whose training had been forged in environments where detection meant death and hesitation meant failure. The first 500 yards of her approach were conducted through flooded cypress groves that provided concealment, but required careful navigation around obstacles that could create noise or movement that would alert the defensive positions. Sarah's camouflage and movement techniques suggested training that went far beyond civilian shooting sports, reflecting skills that were typically associated with military special operations or intelligence fieldwork. Approaching compound perimeter, Sarah reported through her radio while observing defensive positions through her rifle scope. Subjects are maintaining interior positions, but have sentries watching approach routes. I'm detecting at least 3 defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire. Sheriff Babineau coordinated with federal agencies while monitoring Sarah's progress toward what every tactical expert would have declared a suicide mission. Ms. Chen, federal intelligence reports suggest these subjects have military training and extensive combat experience. They're not going to be easily surprised or intimidated. Sheriff, military training means predictable tactics and standard defensive procedures, Sarah replied while studying the compound's defensive layout. Predictability creates opportunities for someone who understands how trained soldiers think and react under pressure. Sarah's analysis of the compound's defenses revealed tactical vulnerabilities that reflected the subjects' military backgrounds. Their defensive positions were professionally constructed but followed standard doctrines that created patterns someone with the right training could exploit. The same tactical efficiency that made them dangerous also made their responses predictable. To someone who understood military methodology, the final approach to the compound required crossing 200 yards of open ground that had been cleared, specifically to create a killing field for defensive positions. Sarah studied the terrain through her scope while calculating approach routes that might minimize her exposure to concentrated fire from multiple positions. Beginning final approach, Sarah announced while settling into shooting position for covering fire that would suppress defensive positions during her movement. Across open ground, request radio silence until compound is secured. Sheriff Babineau watched through binoculars as Sarah Chun, the invisible custodian who had cleaned around shooting range members for 7 years, prepared to attempt an assault that would challenge the most elite special operations personnel. Her tactical movements and operational planning suggested capabilities that defied explanation, skills that had remained hidden behind 7 years of carefully maintained anonymity. The shot that followed would travel through a window opening, no larger than a keyhole, across a distance that challenged belief, in atmospheric conditions that made precision shooting theoretical rather than practical. But Sarah Chun had already demonstrated that theoretical limitations meant nothing when innocent lives depended on someone willing to attempt the impossible. The keyhole shot came at dawn when Hurricane Delilah's eye passed directly overhead, and the world fell into an eerie calm that felt like nature holding its breath. Sarah had maneuvered to within 300 yards of the compound's main house, positioning herself behind a concrete drainage culvert that provided both cover and a stable shooting platform for the impossible shot that would end this nightmare. Through her scope, she could see into the basement window where the remaining hostages were being held. The opening was no larger than a dinner plate, partially obscured by structural supports that left a clear shooting lane barely 8 inches wide. Inside, she could see the final subject holding a pistol to a young girl's head while using her as a human shield. The mathematics were brutal. A shot through an 8-inch gap at 300 yards, accounting for wind drift and the slight downward angle, with zero margin for error. Miss by an inch in any direction and an innocent child dies. The kind of shot that existed only in the realm of legend, impossible for anyone except someone whose training had been forged in circumstances that demanded perfection or death. Sarah's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had learned years ago, in places whose names appeared on no maps, during operations that officially never happened. Her finger settled on the trigger with the gentle pressure of someone who had made shots like this when failure meant more than personal death, when missing meant entire missions collapsed and innocent people paid the price for hesitation. The shot echoed through the sudden stillness like divine judgment. The bullet traveled its precise trajectory through the keyhole opening, past structural obstacles that would have stopped a lesser marksman, finding its target with the certainty of advanced physics married to skills that transcended normal human limitations. The subject dropped instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the concrete floor as the hostages scrambled toward the exits that tactical teams had already secured. 12 innocent lives saved by a shot that defied every reasonable expectation of what was possible under the circumstances. Sheriff Babineau's tactical team swept through the compound with the efficiency of professionals who had trained for exactly this type of operation, but they found only scattered equipment and evidence of a criminal conspiracy that would take federal investigators months to unravel completely. The hostage crisis was over, ended by someone whose true capabilities had remained hidden until circumstances demanded their revelation. Sarah emerged from the compound carrying her rifle with the casual competence of someone for whom such weapons were tools rather than trophies. Her movements showed the controlled exhaustion that followed intense operations, but her bearing retained the quiet dignity that had characterized her years of invisible service at the shooting range. "Ms. Chun," Sheriff Babineau approached with the careful respect reserved for someone who had just accomplished the impossible. "Those shots you made today will be studied by tactical experts for years to come. I've never seen anything like that level of precision under those conditions." "Sheriff, I just did what needed to be done when no one else could," Sarah replied with the same quiet humility she had shown while emptying trash cans and cleaning shooting benches. Sometimes circumstances require that people reveal capabilities they've kept private. But Amanda Price had spent the morning asking questions that federal databases couldn't answer, trying to find records that matched Sarah Chun's demonstrated capabilities with any official training or service. The searches had revealed nothing, as if someone with extraordinary skills had been deliberately erased from every system that might document their existence. "Ma'am, we need to discuss your background and qualifications," Amanda said with professional curiosity that masked growing amazement. "What you accomplished today suggests training that doesn't appear in any civilian records." Sarah considered her response while studying the hurricane-ravaged landscape that surrounded them. 7 years of careful invisibility had been stripped away in a few hours of crisis response, but the hostages were alive and the criminals were neutralized. Sometimes the mission required sacrificing operational security for the greater good. "Deputy, my background includes experiences that aren't documented in databases you can access," Sarah replied with quiet authority. "I've served my country in ways that required anonymity and abilities that I hoped never to use again." The implications settled over the law enforcement officers like morning fog. Sarah Chun wasn't a shooting range custodian who happened to possess extraordinary marksmanship skills. She was someone whose true identity and training had been deliberately concealed. Someone whose presence at an isolated shooting facility represented retirement from operations that required capabilities beyond normal human limits. Federal investigators would arrive within hours, asking questions about classified operations and requesting access to records that officially didn't exist. Sarah's carefully constructed anonymity was ending, but 12 innocent people were alive, because someone with hidden extraordinary abilities had been in the right place when circumstances demanded the impossible. "Ms. Chun, there are going to be investigations and debriefings about today's operation," Sheriff Babineau warned with genuine concern. "Federal agencies will want detailed information about your background and training." "Sheriff, I'll cooperate with whatever investigations are necessary," Sarah replied while securing her equipment with practiced efficiency. "But I hope you understand that some service records remain classified for reasons that extend beyond personal privacy." As emergency responders coordinated cleanup operations and federal investigators began processing evidence from the compound. Sarah Chun quietly returned to her dented Honda Civic and prepared to drive away from the shooting range where she had spent 7 years perfecting the art of invisibility. The hurricane was passing, but the storm in her life was just beginning. 3 weeks later, a new custodial position opened at Riverbend Shooting Range. The job posting was brief and unremarkable, seeking someone reliable to maintain equipment and clean facilities. But the members who had dismissed Sarah Chun as nothing more than the cleaning lady now approached their shooting with different awareness, understanding that extraordinary people sometimes choose ordinary lives for reasons that only become apparent when circumstances demand the revelation of hidden greatness. The range's wall now displayed a simple plaque commemorating the events of Hurricane Delilah, though it mentioned only that local law enforcement had successfully resolved a hostage crisis with the assistance of civilian resources. Sarah Chun's name appeared nowhere on the memorial, exactly as she had requested before disappearing into whatever new anonymity awaited. Someone whose cover had been permanently compromised by doing what was right when no one else could. Marcus. Webb found a handwritten note in his equipment locker, written in careful script on plain paper. The most important shots are the ones you hope you never have to take. When that day comes, make sure you're ready. It was signed only with the initials SC, but he understood immediately who had written it and why. Jennifer Hartwell discovered that her expensive European hunting rifle had been cleaned and calibrated to perfection, with adjustments that improved its accuracy beyond anything she had achieved during years of practice. A small note attached to the case read, "Excellence requires constant attention to details that others might overlook." Dr. Patterson found detailed calculations in his shooting notebook, written in margins beside his own data. The mathematical correction showed atmospheric compensation techniques that would have impressed NASA engineers, but the handwriting belonged to someone who had cleaned around his experiments for 7 years without ever revealing her understanding of the physics. He studied. The truth about Sarah Chun would remain classified in federal databases that few people could access, but her impact on the people whose lives she had touched would endure long after her carefully constructed identity had been replaced by whatever new anonymity her handlers deemed necessary for someone whose skills remained too valuable to retire completely. Somewhere in America, a woman with extraordinary abilities was probably emptying trash cans or cleaning floors while observing the world with eyes that missed nothing and hands that could accomplish the impossible when circumstances demanded action. The invisible guardians walk among us every day, serving quietly until the moment arrives when hidden greatness must be revealed to save innocent lives. Never underestimate the quiet person in the corner. You never know how far their shots have traveled or what battles they've won in places whose names you'll never learn. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.